Hi guys, welcome to Intermediate Music Theory lesson number 2. We're going to be talking about the minor scale today. In our previous video we introduced the major scale, and the minor scale is like the second or equally important as the major scale. The major and minor scale make up the two most important scales in almost all of music, so they're really important to know. So let's dig into the details of how to make minor scales. We're going to use musictheory.net for our lesson, and we are going to go to scales and key signatures, the second lesson, the minor scales. So before we get into minor scales, I want to remind you guys of something I talked about in my video last week. There are two rules that apply to the major scale that also apply to the minor scale. And those two rules are very simple. When we build scales, we cannot repeat note name or skip note name. And when I say note name, I'm talking about A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So as we're building the scale, we can't say G, G sharp, or G, B flat. Because G, G sharp, we're repeating the note name, and G, B flat, we're skipping A, okay? So just remember this rule, because these two rules are also, they're also going to apply for building minor scales, okay? So let's get started. So the minor scale, actually one interesting thing about the minor scale is that when we talked about the major scale, there was only one version of the major scale. But the minor scale is going to have three different versions. They're similar, but have minor differences, especially towards the end of the scale. And we will go through all three versions as we go through this lesson. So the first minor scale, and the most basic one, is then called the natural minor. And just like we did with the major scale, we're going to be following a formula or a recipe to build these scales so that we can apply that rule to build these scales starting on any note. The recipe for building a natural minor scale is very simple. We start with a whole step between the first and second note, and then we make a half step between the second and third note of the scale, whole step between third and fourth note, whole step between fourth and fifth note, half step between fifth and sixth note, and then whole step between sixth and seventh note, and final whole step between the seventh and eighth note. Remember that these scales are all built based on a single octave, so we're going through the musical alphabet until we come around to the same note name that we started with. So in scales, typically we never go past the single octave, okay? So, and by the way, if you're not sure the difference between whole step and half step, I'll be reviewing it in this lesson, but also review it in the first lesson, the major scale. I reviewed it in a lot more detail there. Okay, so let's actually start building some natural minor scales, okay? The first natural minor scale that we're going to make is A minor. So we're going to start with A, the second space from the bottom, and we're going to make a whole step. Now, also watch the keyboard here on the right as we do this, and you're going to see that we're going to be skipping through some keys to make whole steps, okay? So we start with A natural, and we have to make a whole step for the next note. So we're going to go to B natural. And as you saw here, we skipped over the black key in between them. That would have been either A sharp or B flat. So we skip over that to be able to make a whole step. So the next note, the third note of the scale, we need to make a half step. So we're going to have C natural. And as you saw, the distance between B natural and C natural was already a half step because there is no black key in between, okay? So let's work a little bit more quickly through these exercises since we got some practice with the major scale. So from C natural, we have to make a whole step. So we end up with D natural. We skipped this key. Now, for the fifth note of the scale, we need to go up a whole step, I'm sorry. And that brings us to E natural. We skip this key. Now, we have to make a half step between the fifth and sixth note. So we need to go up a half step, which brings us to F natural. And you can see here very clearly in the keyboard that the distance between E natural and F natural is already a half step. Okay, so whole step up from F natural brings us to G natural, and this was the sixth note of the scale and the seventh note of the scale. And finally, we need to make a final whole step, and that brings us from G natural to A natural, and we've completed the octave now. We started in A, and we've gone up the scale note by note until we come to A. So let's hear what the A natural minor scale sounds like. Okay, and I mentioned this in the major scale video, and I will mention it again. So these scales have a very specific sound because these like distances between the notes are always going to be the same no matter what note we start in. So they start to sound similar even though we can build them from starting in different notes. The more you practice with this, the more you're going to be able to hear the sound of a specific scale from the get-go without having to think about, well, was that a whole step or was that a half step? It becomes kind of like a more intuitive process the more you practice listening to them. And that's why in these lessons, I always want to make sure that I play them for you so that you hear what they sound like. So take a note for a second that we didn't need to add any accidentals or any sharps or flats to the A natural minor scale. This is the interesting thing about the A natural minor scale is that we don't need to add accidentals to make it work. Just like C major didn't need any accidentals to make it work, the A natural minor is also all natural, no accidentals, and you also notice that it was all the Y keys on the keyboard. As you're going to see now, in order to build some other minor scales, we're going to have to add accidentals to keep these relationships, this like distance between the notes, or what we call intervallic relationships. The interval is just a distance between two notes. We're going to cover intervals in a lot more detail in a later lesson, but I just want to start mentioning these terms so that you kind of start getting used to them. But for now, we just need to worry about whole steps and half steps. So we're going to build G sharp natural minor scale. So we're starting in G sharp, and we're going to go through this one a little bit more quickly. But once again, keep an eye on the keyboard as well as the notation staff here on the left. So the distance between the first and second note is going to be a whole step. So from G sharp, to make a whole step, we go to A sharp. So distance between second and third note is going to be a half step, and the half step up from A sharp is going to be B natural. So distance between third and fourth note is going to be whole step, and the whole step up from B natural is going to be C sharp. Distance between fourth and fifth note is going to be whole step, and that's going to be D sharp up from C sharp to D sharp. The distance between fifth and sixth note is going to be a half step, and so that brings us from D sharp to E natural. Sixth to seventh note, we need to go up a whole step, and we start from E natural, and that brings us to F sharp. And finally, a whole step from F sharp to our final note is going to be G sharp. And of course, the last note of the scale is always going to be the same as the first note. Okay, so let's listen to a G sharp natural minor scale. So as you can see, it sounds kind of similar to A natural minor. I'm going to play A natural minor again, and then I'll play G sharp minor so you kind of hear them back to back. Okay, so that was A minor, A natural minor, and let's hear G sharp natural minor again. Okay, so let's check out how many accidentals we had to add to make this G sharp natural minor scale work. So we started with G sharp, and then we added, so we started with 1 sharp, then we had to add 2, 3, 4, and 5. We don't count the second G sharp because we already counted it once at the beginning of the scale. So G sharp natural minor has 5 sharps, okay? And going back to the rule I mentioned earlier about not repeating or skipping notes. So for example, here we could have said, instead of A sharp, why don't we write B flat, right? Because if you notice in the keyboard, A sharp and B flat are the same pitch. They use the same key in the keyboard, but they're not the same note name, right? So if we had used B flat instead of A sharp, the problem is that we would have had to skip the letter A. And remember, that is one of the rules that's not allowed. So we wouldn't have done that. Also, if we had used B flat, then in the next note, B natural, we would have had to repeat the letter name B. And that's also not allowed. So just remember, this is just a rule. And as you learn more about scales and other like more kind of in-depth ideas of music theory, you're gonna see kind of why that is. There's a reason why this rule exists. It's not just somebody wanted to make our lives difficult. So just keep that in mind. So let's do C natural minor now. So next note, we need to go up a whole step. So from C natural, we go to D natural. Next note is a half step up, so we go to E flat. The next note is a whole step above E flat, so we go to F natural. So from F natural, a whole step up goes to G natural. So half step from G natural brings us to A flat. So next step is a whole step, and that goes from A flat to B flat. And finally, the final whole step from B flat is C natural. Let's listen to C natural minor. All right, so you guys hear that pretty similar to the way that G sharp minor sounded and A minor, E natural minor. So, and this one, as you saw, has 3 flats. And the reason is pretty simple, right? We started with a whole step from C to D natural, but then we had to make a half step between D natural and the next note. Now, if you look here in the keyboard, this is D natural, and a half step was this black key. Now, we could have said D sharp, which, you know, raises the D natural up by a half step, or we could say, let's lower the next note name, E natural, by a half step. But we picked E flat because D sharp would have made us repeat the letter D, okay? So that's why this scale ended up having flats instead of sharps. Okay, so next scale is the harmonic minor. Now, the harmonic minor is pretty similar to the natural minor. It starts the same way, but we raise, or we make the 7th note of the scale half step higher than the natural minor. So the first half of the scale is the same. We still have a half step between 2 and 3. But now we're going to have the 7th scale note be half step higher. So we're actually going to have more than a whole step between the 6th and 7th note. We're going to have a whole step and a half step, so 3 half steps. Let's follow along and make C natural minor into C harmonic minor. So all we're going to do here is bring that seventh note, the B flat, and we're going to raise it by a half step. So that's going to become B natural. So let's take a closer look at what happened here. So let's start with A flat, right? So in our keyboard, let's take a look. A flat would be right here. This would be the key that would play A flat. So to go to B natural, we're actually going to have to go up 3 half steps. So this is going to be, at this point, we're going bigger than a whole step. So we go from A flat to A natural, A sharp or B flat, and then finally B natural. So we went up 1, 2, 3 half steps. That's important because this is the first time in a scale that we're having a distance that's bigger than a whole step. Okay, let's listen to C harmonic minor to hear what that sounds like. So you hear it's almost the same. It sounds the same at the beginning, but then once you get here, it's a pretty big difference in the sound between natural minor and harmonic minor. Let me play them back to back so that you can really compare them. Let's hear C natural minor. And let's hear C harmonic minor. So you heard the sound between these two notes was really quite different. Okay, the last form of the minor scale is called melodic. And melodic is gonna be pretty similar to harmonic minor, except we're gonna make a small change. So in the melodic minor, we're actually going to raise or make higher the 6th note of the scale. So in the harmonic minor, we made the 7th note higher a half step, but in melodic minor, we're gonna make the 6th note and the 7th note both up a half step. So let's now take the same example, C natural minor, and let's turn that into melodic minor. So before, in C natural minor, we had A flat. And raising A flat by a half step is going to bring us to A natural. And if you remember, C natural minor also had B flat, but we've raised that note by half step, making it B natural. So let's hear what C melodic minor sounds like. Okay, and the last thing I want to do is I want to play you guys all 3 versions of C minor, natural, harmonic, and melodic back to back, so that you start like practicing the ear training part of like music theory, which is super important, which is being able to kind of tell things apart just by ear. So let's go to C natural minor. Let's listen. Okay, that was C natural minor. Let's go to C harmonic minor. Okay, and finally, C melodic minor. So if you noticed, really the difference in sound is coming from the places where we made changes, of course, which is the 6th and 7th note of the scale.